Welcome to Walker of Worlds podcast. My name's Rachel, and we're going to step behind the veil to take a look at some long lost and little known spooky stories and urban legends. Apologies for not having been around for much of this year. Unfortunately, health issues have caught up with me, so I've been taking it a lot slower than I normally would. However, it's Christmas, and as such, a traditional time to tell tales of the spooky and paranormal. Sitting beside the fire and telling hair-raising tales has been happening for as long as we've been telling stories, before reaching its peak in the Victorian era. So light some candles, make a hot drink, and let's delve into the dark depths of some strange Christmas stories. When we think of Christmas and ghosts, many people instantly jump to A Christmas Carol. The tale by Charles Dickens features the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, as well as the ghost of Jacob Marley. The story tells of how Ebenezer Scrooge must change his ways before he too joins Marley in a hellish afterlife. Our first stop quite literally is Oxford. The year is 1874 and a passenger train from London to Birmingham was making its way up the country. The train needed to pick up an extra carriage in order to make room for all of the passengers who were making their way home for the holidays. Despite the time of the train, it stopped at Oxford at 11:40 p.m. on December 23rd, the train was already full. However, the carriage that had been attached between the engine and the rest of the train was an older model and apparently not in the best of conditions. This was the carriage that they intended to use to pick up additional passengers along the way. Half an hour after leaving Oxford, while the train was passing up the Sherwell Valley in between the villages of Shipton on Sherwell and Hampton Poyle, a wheel broke on the extra carriage. For a time, the carriage remained on the rails and the passengers managed to alert the engine driver by waving out of a window. The driver immediately applied the front brakes without warning the guards in the rear carriage to also apply the rear brakes. This proved to be a fateful mistake. Without rear braking, the momentum of the following carriages caused them to collide violently with the damaged carriage and engine, derailing the front carriage and pulling the following ones after it. The carriages careened down the embankment and across a field, with some of them ending up in the Oxford Canal. Witnesses described some carriages as being smashed to atoms, while bodies and wreckage was strewn across the fields. Workers from the nearby paper mill at Hampton Gay heard the accident and rushed to help. They moved the injured and the deceased back to the paper mill, while the nearby manor house at Hampton Gay became the base of operations for the subsequent inquiry. The inquiry found a number of things wrong, including outdated carriages and braking systems, and poor communication between the train staff. That night, 34 people died and another 69 were injured. Interestingly, the Hampton Gay Manor House suffered a fire in 1887 and was never rebuilt. The fire was said to have been caused by a curse placed up on it following the occupants' refusal to allow victims of the train crash to seek refuge there. Another tale, which is featured in the book Curious Oxfordshire, tells how a local witch, Martha Pierce, was said to have predicted the Christmas Eve train crash. The question is, if anyone had acted on her words, would the crash have been prevented? We're staying in Oxfordshire for the moment while we visit the picturesque village of Minster Lovell. Located approximately 15 miles west of Oxford, this little village is home to 1,400 people. Streets of thatched cottages mingle with more modern housing as the village has expanded, taking residents of the nearby RAF Bryce Norton. There's a church, a handful of bed and breakfasts, and a smattering of shops. Just behind the church in the north of the village are the remains of Minster Lovell Hall. Built in approximately 1440, the hall was home to the Lovell family and, over the years, has seen a lot of life as well as a lot of tragedy. Several ghosts have been seen walking among the remains, or heard, including that of a woman in a wedding dress. One Christmas, a celebration was taking place to honour the marriage between the daughter of a wealthy local family and her bridegroom. As part of the festivities, a traditional game of hide and seek was proposed, with the bride hiding and the bridegroom searching for her. For a while, much merriment ensued, but this merriment slowly turned to alarm when it became clear that the bride was nowhere to be found. They called for her all around the house and grounds, looking for her to come out of hiding, but their calls went unanswered. Search parties were organised and the river was even dredged, but no sign of the bride could be found. Unable to find her, the woman's family friends, and groom eventually gave up the search and most likely believed that she had run away to be with somebody else. However, many years later, the mystery was finally solved. The then owners of the hall were clearing out an old attic room when they found a large oak chest locked from the outside by a latch. Within the chest, they found a skeleton in a wedding dress, and so the bride's sad story was finally told in full. Thinking that she had found the perfect hiding place, the bride had climbed into the chest only to find the latch falling into place and locking her inside. With the heavy oak chest muffling her cries, she had sadly suffocated. Train crashes seem to be a big theme in the winter. Maybe it's the stress of the season, icy rails, or overcrowded trains that cause the accidents. But another crash has caused questions to be asked. Located 6 miles south of Charing Cross is a suburb of Lewisham. In 1956, the government had brought in the Clean Air Act in order to try and quash the constant smog that hung over the city. You can sometimes still see the remains of this smog in the facades of the city's buildings. December 4th, 1957 was a foggy day. The train services in and out of the city had been heavily delayed due to the weather and the smog that still hung over the streets. The Clean Air Act had yet to fully kick in, and so winters were still seeing the pea super fogs. Because of the bad weather, the running order of the trains had been changed, and a Hastings train heading towards Ladywell was wrongly held at a red signal, on the assumption that a train heading towards Hayes was in front of it. It wasn't. The crowded electric commuter train was behind and stopped at a red signal close to St John's, just beyond the point where the line from Nunhead joins it. Its brakes were firmly on and it was on a slight incline at that point. At just before 6:20 p.m, a late-running steam train from Cannon Street to Ramsgate approached. Its driver had missed 2 yellow warning signals, and when he saw the lights of the Hayes train, it was too late. The Ramsgate train ploughed into the stationary Hayes-bound electric. The front coach of the former left at the track and crashed into the bridge from Nunhead, which partially collapsed onto the first 3 coaches of the still-moving Ramsgate train. Further up the track, 2 of the Hayes train carriages were forced upwards and together as a result of the impact from behind. The accident could have been even worse as a train was approaching the bridge from Nunhead. Fortunately, the damage to the bridge caused a partial derailment and the driver saw the problem ahead and was able to stop in time. The extent of the damage to the twisted bridge from above became visible as the fog cleared and daylight broke the following morning. The conditions that the rescue workers operated in were atrocious, with one syndicated newspaper report describing it as Dantesque. Rescue workers, they said, were moving like ghosts in the all-embracing fog, guided by the screams of the injured trapped within the wreckage. There was also the evidence of everyday life of coats, gloves, handbags and briefcases strewn across the site, along with Christmas parcels bought hours earlier in the West End scattered across the tracks. That night, 90 people lost their lives, but their tale doesn't end there. In 1983, on a night that was reminiscent of that of the crash, a British rail inspector was waiting for a bus at Lewisham Station. The hour was late, and at a little after 2 a.m, he heard someone call for help. The voice seemed to be coming from the roof of a nearby tall building, and the person sounded as though they were trapped. The inspector immediately phoned the police and a patrol car soon arrived. The police constable who arrived to meet the inspector could also hear the cries, but oddly wasn't surprised by them. He told the inspector that no one was trapped, nor was anyone calling for help. Instead, he was hearing the voices of those who'd been trapped in the Lewisham train disaster a quarter of a century before. The constable had heard the screams many times before, as had many others in the area. Apparently the screams were almost guaranteed to happen on cold, foggy nights. Our final story doesn't take place at Christmas, but has been a staple of telling tales on cold, dark nights for well over a century. The Exe estuary is located on the coast of Devon and is home to a variety of different animals. The area is a special protection area and, during the winter, sees over 10,000 wildfowl call it home. But long before the estuary was a protected area, something very strange happened. On the night of the 8th and 9th of February 1855, a heavy snowfall covered the area. On those nights, and for several afterwards, cloven footprints appeared in the snow. But these footprints didn't take the normal pathways that humans would follow. Instead, they took a straight line which included walking over roofs, up and down drain pipes and across haystacks, rivers and walls. The footprints measured about 4 inches long and 3 inches wide. The footprint's stride was between 8 and 16 inches, and all in all, whoever the footprints belonged to covered somewhere in the region of 40 to 100 miles. What was odd about the footprints were the shape. They weren't human, nor were they animal. Instead, they were cloven, leading to the belief that the devil himself had walked over houses, rivers, walls, and haystacks in the dead of a bitter winter night. A news article dated February 18th, 1855 reads as follows. It appears on Thursday last night there was very heavy snowfall in the neighbourhood of Exeter in the south of Devon. On the following morning the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the footmarks of some strange and mysterious animal endowed with a power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of uncountable places, on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards enclosed by high walls, as well as in open fields. The superstitious go as so far to believe that they were the marks of Satan himself, and that great excitement has been produced among all classes may be judged from the fact that the subject has been descanted from the pulpit. The impressions of the foot closely resemble that of a donkey's shoe, and measured from 1.5 inches to, in some instances, 2.5 inches across. Here and there it appeared as if cloven, but in the generality of the steps the shoe was continuous, and, from the snow in the centre remaining entire, merely showed the outer crest of the foot. It must have been concave. The area in which the prints appeared extended from Exmouth up to Topsham, and across the Exe estuary to Dawlish. An article published in 1890 stated that the footprints appeared further afield, including as far south as Torquay and as far north as Lincolnshire. There have been several theories as to what caused these bizarre footprints. Some investigators are sceptical that the tracks really extended for more than 100 miles, arguing that no one would have been able to follow that entire course in a single day. In his Fortean Studies article, Mike Dash concluded that there was no one source for the hoof marks. Some of the tracks were probably hoaxes, some were made by common quadrupeds such as donkeys and ponies, and some by wood mice. He admitted, though, that these cannot explain all the reported marks, and the mystery remains. Author Geoffrey Household suggested that an experimental balloon released by mistake from Devonport dockyard had left the mysterious tracks by trailing 2 shackles on the end of its mooring ropes. His source was a local man, Major Carter, whose grandfather had worked at Devonport at the time. Carter claimed that the incident had been hushed up because the balloon also wrecked a number of conservatories, greenhouses and windows before finally descending to earth in Honiton. While this could explain the shape of the prints, skeptics have questioned whether the balloon could have travelled such a random zigzag course without its trailing ropes and shackles becoming caught in a tree or other similar obstruction. Other theories have included badgers, donkeys and even a kangaroo, yet no one has been able to sufficiently explain what caused those footprints on a snowy night in the winter of 1855. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed these festive, frightening tales. If you like your books a little on the weird side, please check out our website at www.roswellpublishing.co.uk. And remember, if your Christmas quizzes ask you how many ghosts are featured in A Christmas Carol, the answer is 4. They are the ghosts of Christmas past, present, future, and of course, Jacob Marley. Until then, stay spooky and have a very Merry Christmas and a happy 2025.